The sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless Arizona sky as Sarah Jenkins stumbled across the parched landscape, her dress torn and mudded, her face streaked with tears and dust from the 3 days of walking. Her arms trembled from exhaustion as she clutched her 6-month-old daughter Emma to her breast, the child's cries growing weaker with each passing hour. When Sarah's legs finally gave out beneath her, she collapsed onto a patch of dry grass, her vision swimming with black spots as she struggled to remain conscious. "Please, just a little longer," she whispered, gently placing Emma down on the grass. "Mama just needs to rest, sweet girl." But Emma's plaintive wails, though feeble, tore at Sarah's heart. The baby was starving. Sarah's milk had dried up a day ago, and the small bundle of provisions she'd managed to grab before fleeing had been depleted since yesterday morning. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered in Sarah's exhausted mind until they were nearly upon her. She tried to move to shield her baby, but her limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. "Hello there," a deep voice called out. "Are you all right, madam?" Sarah squinted up through the blinding sunlight to see a tall figure dismounting from a chestnut mare. Emma's cries grew more insistent. Jake O'Malley had been tracking a small herd of wild mustangs since dawn when the unmistakable sound of a baby's cry carried across the open prairie. At 32, he'd spent most of his life on horseback, working cattle drives and breaking horses for the Diamond Cross Ranch. But nothing had prepared him for the sight that greeted him as he rode toward the sound. A young woman, little more than a girl herself, collapsed on the ground with a wailing infant beside her. Jake quickly dismounted, approaching cautiously. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of cornflowers despite their glassy, unfocused state. "My baby," she whispered. "Please help my baby." Without hesitation, Jake unbuttoned his worn leather coat and shrugged it off. He knelt down, carefully wrapping the small, crying infant in the garment before lifting her up. The poor thing was red-faced and clearly hungry, her tiny fists balled in frustration. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, crouching next to the mother while cradling the baby. "3 days, maybe 4, she murmured, struggling to sit up. "Had to leave. He was going to hurt Emma." She reached weakly for her child. Jake noticed her cracked lips and the telltale signs of dehydration. "I've got water," he said, reaching for his canteen. "Small sips now. My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. Can you stand?" The woman Sarah, she eventually told him, managed a few sips of water before attempting to stand with his help. Her legs buckled instantly, and Jake made a quick decision. "Madam, I'm going to get you both to safety, but you'll need to trust me." Without waiting for her response, he gently placed the baby back in her arms, then lifted them both, mother and child together, onto his horse. He mounted behind them, one arm securely around Sarah's waist to keep her from falling. "My name's Jake O'Malley," he said as he urged his horse forward at a careful pace. "You're safe now, both of you." Sarah leaned back against his solid chest, too weak to do anything but hold her baby and stay conscious. "Sarah Jenkins," she whispered, "and this is Emma." "Pleased to meet you both," Jake replied, his voice gentling as he felt her trembling, "though I wish it were under better circumstances." As they rode toward his homestead, Jake felt something stir within him, a protectiveness he'd never experienced before. This woman and her baby needed help, and something told him their story was just beginning. The small cabin came into view just as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Jake's homestead wasn't grand, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, situated near a creek that provided water year-round, but it was solid, clean, and safe. "We're here," he said softly, realizing Sarah had fallen into an exhausted half-sleep against him. She startled awake, clutching Emma tighter. "Where?" she began, confusion evident in her voice. "My place," Jake assured her. "Let me help you down." Once inside, Jake quickly set about making his guests comfortable. He placed Sarah on his bed with Emma beside her, then heated water for both drinking and washing. From his limited stores, he produced jerky, dried apples, and hardtack not ideal for a nursing mother, but it would have to do until morning. "I don't know what to feed the baby," he admitted as Sarah devoured the simple food. "I've got goat's milk from my nanny goat. Would that do for now?" Sarah nodded gratefully. "Watered down a bit. She's only 6 months." She watched as Jake diluted the milk and found a clean cloth to serve as a makeshift bottle. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed, and despite her exhaustion, Sarah felt a flutter of something besides fear for the first time in days. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes as Emma eagerly sucked on the cloth-wrapped milk. "We would have died out there." Jake shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sarah said firmly, her blue eyes meeting his. "Not anyone, not where I come from." As darkness fell, Jake made a pallet for himself on the floor, insisting Sarah and Emma take his bed. "Tomorrow we can figure things out," he assured her. "For now, just rest." In the quiet darkness, as Emma's breathing settled into the rhythm of sleep, Sarah stared at the ceiling rafters. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since fleeing her husband's violent rage 4 days ago, she allowed herself to hope that she and Emma might have a future after all. Jake lay awake long after Sarah's breathing had evened out in sleep. His thoughts churned as he tried to make sense of the day's unexpected turn. What was a young woman doing alone in the wilderness with an infant? Who or what had she been running from? And what was he supposed to do now that they were here? At 32, Jake had grown accustomed to his solitary existence. After serving as a cavalry scout during the final years of the Civil War, he drifted west, working cattle drives until he'd saved enough to claim this modest parcel of land 3 years ago. The nearest town, Silver Creek, was 15 miles away, and he typically only made the journey once a month for supplies and occasional human interaction. Now his quiet life had been upended by 2 unexpected guests, one of whom couldn't even speak yet. Strangely, though, he found himself more curious than resentful about this disruption. Dawn broke with Emma's hungry cries. Jake was already up, having slept fitfully. He quickly heated more goat's milk while Sarah comforted the baby. "I hope this will do until we can get proper supplies," he said, handing over another cloth-wrapped bundle of diluted milk. Sarah accepted it gratefully. In the clear morning light, Jake could better see the bruising on her face, a yellowing mark across her cheekbone that spoke volumes about what she might have been fleeing. "There's wash water if you'd like to clean up," he offered, pointedly not commenting on her injuries. "I can step outside while you thank you," she interrupted, her voice stronger than yesterday, "for everything. But I don't want to impose any further. If you could just point us toward town, we'll be on our way." Jake frowned. "Madam Sarah, you're hardly in any condition to travel yet. And town's 15 miles from here." "We've already taken advantage of your kindness," she insisted, though her pale face and trembling hands belied her determination. "Look," Jake said, running a hand through his dark hair, "at least stay until you've regained your strength. A day or 2. Then if you still want to head to town, I'll take you myself." Sarah hesitated, bouncing Emma gently as she considered his offer. Whatever she was running from had clearly frightened her badly enough that the idea of staying in one place, even somewhere as isolated as his cabin, made her nervous. "No one knows you're here," he added quietly, understanding her fear without her having to voice it. "And no one will find you, I give you my word." Finally, she nodded. 2 days, she agreed. "Then we'll move on. Jake felt oddly relieved. Good. Now, I've got chores to tend to, but make yourself at home. There's more food in the pantry, and the creek out back is good for washing clothes if you need to. Throughout the day, Jake went about his routine while keeping a watchful eye on his cabin. Sarah emerged briefly to wash their few garments in the creek. Emma bundled in a clean shirt he'd offered. The domestic scene stirred something long dormant in his chest, a longing he'd suppressed since returning from the war to find his family farm sold, and his parents buried in the small cemetery behind the Methodist church in his Kentucky hometown. By evening, he decided to ride into town the following day. "You and the little one need proper supplies," he told Sarah as they shared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and the rabbit he'd snared that afternoon. "I can be there and back by nightfall." Sarah looked up from feeding Emma, who was happily accepting small tastes of mashed beans. "I don't have any money to repay you," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for payment," Jake replied, somewhat gruffly. "Just write down what you both need and I'll see to it." The list Sarah provided the next morning was modest cloth diapers for Emma, a baby bottle if available, and simple necessities for herself. Jake added items to his mental list as he rode toward Silver Creek. Proper food for a nursing mother, maybe some fabric for new clothing, perhaps even a toy for the baby. Silver Creek was bustling for a Tuesday, the weekly stage having arrived the previous day. Jake conducted his business efficiently, avoiding the curious glances his unusually varied purchases attracted. He was loading his saddlebags when a familiar voice hailed him. "Jake O'Malley, twice in 1 month, what brings you back to civilization so soon?" Sheriff Tom Wilson ambled over, his weathered face creased in a friendly smile beneath his salt and pepper mustache. "Just needed some extra supplies, Tom," Jake answered casually. The sheriff's eyes fell on the small wooden baby rattle protruding from one of the bags. His bushy eyebrows rose questioningly. "For the Hendersons' new little one," Jake lied smoothly, naming a family whose ranch bordered his property to the south. "Figured I'd save them the trip." Tom nodded, apparently satisfied, but then his expression grew more serious. "Keep an eye out on your way home. Had a stranger come through yesterday asking about a young woman and her baby. Said his wife ran off with his child." He shook his head. "Seemed respectable enough, but there was something in his eyes I didn't care for. Claimed he tracked her heading in the direction of your spread." Jake's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "What he look like?" "Well-dressed fellow. Eastern clothes, fancy boots that have never seen real work. Called himself Richard Jenkins." The surname confirmed Jake's suspicions. This had to be Sarah's husband, the man she'd fled from. "I'll keep my eyes open," Jake promised. "Any description of the woman? Pretty little thing with blue eyes, according to him. Baby's about 6 months old." Tom studied Jake's face. "You seen anyone matching that description?" "Can't say that I have," Jake replied steadily. "Not many travelers come my way." The sheriff seemed to accept this. "Well, if you do spot her, send word. Though between you and me," he added in a lower voice, "I got the impression she might have good reason to run. Fellow had the look of someone used to getting his way, if you take my meaning." Jake nodded grimly. "I understand completely." The ride back to his homestead seemed interminable as Jake's mind raced with this new information. Sarah's husband was looking for her, and he was close. Too close. The bruises on Sarah's face took on new significance, confirming what he'd already suspected. She was running from an abusive husband. When he finally reached the cabin, he found Sarah sitting on the porch steps, Emma asleep in her arms, the setting sun casting a golden glow over them both. The sight momentarily stole his breath. They looked so peaceful, so right somehow, sitting there as if they belonged. The moment was shattered when Sarah noticed his expression. "What's happened?" she asked immediately, rising to her feet. Jake dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. "Your husband's in Silver Creek," he said without preamble. "He's looking for you." The color drained from Sarah's face. "Richard's here." "In Arizona territory." She clutched Emma tighter. "How did he find us? We need to leave right away." "Wait," Jake interrupted, approaching her and instinctively placing his hands on her shoulders to steady her. "He doesn't know you're here." "I didn't say anything to give you away." Sarah trembled beneath his touch. "You don't understand. Richard won't stop looking. He has connections, money. He'll find us eventually." "Not if we're careful," Jake insisted. "Tell me what happened, Sarah. Why are you running?" For a moment, she looked as if she might refuse, but then her shoulders slumped in resignation. "Let's go inside," she murmured. "I'll tell you everything." Once Emma was settled in a makeshift cradle, a drawer padded with blankets, Sarah sat at Jake's rough-hewn table and began her story. "I met Richard when I was 17, she explained, her fingers nervously tracing the wood grain. "My father died when I was young and my mother struggled to support us. Richard seemed like salvation, handsome, educated, wealthy. He owned a shipping business in Boston and wanted a wife to help advance his social standing." Jake listened silently as she detailed how the charming courtship had quickly soured after their marriage. Richard's controlling behavior escalated to violence when Sarah failed to immediately conceive an heir. When she finally became pregnant after a year of marriage, the abuse subsided briefly, only to resume with greater intensity after Emma's birth. "He was disappointed she wasn't a boy," Sarah said, her voice flat. "And then, last week, I overheard him speaking with the doctor about sending me to an asylum so he could raise Emma with a new, more suitable wife." Her eyes, when they met Jake's, were filled with a mother's fierce determination. "I couldn't let that happen, so I took what little money I had saved and fled west. I hoped he would never find us." Jake's hands clenched into fists. "He won't," he promised. "Not while I have breath in my body." "You don't know what he's capable of," Sarah warned. "And he doesn't know what I'm capable of," Jake countered. "I fought in the war, Sarah. I know how to protect what matters." The intensity of his words surprised them both. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that in just 2 days, these strangers had come to matter to each other in ways neither had anticipated. "Stay here," Jake said quietly. "At least until we figure out what to do next. You'll be safe, I promise." Sarah looked at her sleeping daughter, then back at Jake. "All right," she agreed. "We'll stay. For now." The decision made, Jake brought in his purchases from town, the domestic items transforming his bachelor cabin into something that felt, for the first time in years, like a home. Days stretched into weeks as summer blazed across the Arizona landscape. Jake made occasional trips to town, each time returning with news that Richard Jenkins was still searching, offering rewards for information about his poor, confused wife and innocent child. The citizens of Silver Creek largely kept their distance from the Easterner, their frontier suspicions of outsiders working in Sarah and Emma's favor. During this time, a routine developed at Jake's homestead. Sarah took over the cooking and household tasks, while Jake tended the livestock and worked on expanding his small herd of cattle. Emma thrived under their combined care, her baby giggles becoming a soundtrack to their days. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma asleep inside, Jake turned to Sarah. "I've been thinking," he began hesitantly. "You can't hide forever." Sarah's face fell. "I know. We've imposed on you for too long already. That's not what I meant," he interrupted. "I meant there might be a way to stop running altogether." "How?" "Richard won't give up. Not ever." Jake took a deep breath. "What if he believed you were dead?" Sarah stared at him. "What are you suggesting? Sheriff Wilson is a good man. If we explained the situation, showed him your bruises, told him about Richard's threats, he might be willing to help. We could stage something, make Richard believe that you and Emma perished in an accident." "And then what?" Sarah asked, though a flicker of hope had appeared in her eyes. "And then," Jake continued, his voice growing softer, "you could stay here if you wanted to." The implication hung in the air between them. Over the past weeks, their initial wariness had transformed into friendship, and from there into something deeper that neither had yet named aloud. Sarah's fingers twisted in her lap. "Jake, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "Just think about it. Richard would have no reason to stay in Arizona if he believed you were gone. He'd return east and you and Emma could have a fresh start. With you." She asked directly, her blue eyes meeting his hazel ones. Jake swallowed hard. "If that's what you want." Sarah looked out at the sunset, the fiery colors painting the landscape in gold and crimson. "It's not that simple, Jake. I'm still married in the eyes of the law and God." "There are lawyers in Tucson who might help with the first part," Jake offered. "As for the second, I believe God values truth over ceremony. And the truth is, Richard Jenkins broke his vows long before you fled." They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled over the land, each contemplating a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. The next morning, Sarah agreed to Jake's plan. "But I won't put you at risk," she insisted. "If Richard discovers your involvement, let me worry about that," Jake interrupted, his expression determined. "You focus on keeping Emma safe." 3 days later, Jake rode into Silver Creek alone, requesting a private meeting with Sheriff Wilson. In the small back room of the sheriff's office, he revealed Sarah and Emma's presence at his homestead and explained their situation. Tom Wilson listened gravely, his weathered face hardening as Jake detailed Richard Jenkins' abuse. "I had my suspicions about that fancy-talking Easterner," he admitted when Jake finished. "Something in his manner didn't sit right, but without the lady's testimony." "She's afraid," Jake explained. "With good reason. This man has money and influence. He's threatened to have her committed to take her child." The sheriff considered this, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. "What exactly are you proposing, Jake?" "A deception," Jake admitted. "Something to convince Jenkins that his search is futile, that they're beyond his reach permanently." Understanding dawned in Tom's eyes. "You want me to tell him they're dead?" "Yes." "That's fraud, son. I'm an officer of the law. It's justice," Jake countered. "You've seen what men like Jenkins can do when they believe the law is on their side. Are you really going to send that woman and her baby back to a man who beats her and threatens to lock her away?" The moral dilemma played across the sheriff's weathered features. Finally, he sighed heavily. "I can't officially participate in a deception," he said slowly. "But I might be persuaded to look the other way if certain rumors were to circulate. Tragic rumors about a woman and child matching their description." Relief flooded through Jake. "Thank you, Tom. Don't thank me yet," the sheriff warned. "Jenkins won't be easy to convince. He'll want proof." "Then we'll give him proof," Jake replied grimly. The plan took shape over the next few days. A stage accident would be fabricated, a tragic crash in the mountains where a woman and infant's bodies were supposedly recovered, but were too damaged to be viewed, necessitating immediate burial. Local ranch hands who owed Jake favors would confirm having seen such a woman boarding the ill-fated stage. Sarah listened to these preparations with mixed emotions. "It feels wrong to lie," she confessed to Jake one evening. "Even to Richard." "Sometimes," Jake replied, gently lifting Emma from Sarah's arms as the baby reached for him. "A lie serves truth better than the truth itself." The following week, Richard Jenkins received the devastating news of his wife and child's demise in a stage accident. He demanded to see the bodies, of course, but was informed they had been buried quickly due to the condition of the remains and the summer heat. The crude wooden crosses marking their supposed graves seemed to finally convince him, and after visiting the site, he departed on the next eastbound stage, his face a mask of appropriate grief. Sheriff Wilson observed the Easterner's departure before riding out to Jake's homestead. "It's done," he informed them. "Jenkins is headed back to Boston, convinced he's a widower." Sarah sagged with relief against Jake's steadying hand. "He believed it, truly." "As much as a man like that believes anything," Tom replied. "I don't think he'll be troubling Arizona territory again." That night, after Emma was asleep and the sheriff had departed, Sarah and Jake sat before the fireplace, the weight of their deception and their newfound freedom settling between them. "What happens now?" Sarah asked softly. "Emma and I should find our own place, start building our life anew." Jake's hand found hers in the firelight. "Or," he suggested, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain, "you could stay, both of you, not just hiding anymore but living, here, with me." Sarah turned to face him, her blue eyes searching his face. "Jake O'Malley, are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm not a wealthy man," he said earnestly. "This homestead isn't much compared to what you left behind, but it's honest and it's growing and—" He faltered, then continued more softly, "and I've come to care for you both more than I thought possible." Sarah's free hand reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "We don't need wealth," she whispered, "just safety, kindness, and—" she hesitated, "and love." "That," Jake said, drawing her closer, "I can promise in abundance." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, the beginning of something neither had been looking for but both had found in the most unexpected of circumstances. Autumn painted the landscape in russet and gold as Sarah and Jake's relationship deepened. Emma took her first steps across the cabin floor, toddling between them with delighted squeals that filled the once quiet homestead with life. Though legally Sarah remained married to Richard Jenkins, in her heart and in practice, she had begun a new life as Jake's partner in all things. In Tucson, a sympathetic lawyer heard their unusual case and agreed to quietly investigate options for dissolving Sarah's marriage to a man who believed her dead. The legal complexities were considerable, but not insurmountable, especially with Sheriff Wilson's discreet support and affidavits about Richard's abusive behavior. As winter approached, Jake expanded the cabin, adding a second room for Emma and improving the roof and windows to better withstand the desert's temperature extremes. Sarah planted a garden that flourished under her care, and together they built a life neither had imagined possible just months earlier. One crisp December evening, as they sat before the fire after Emma had been tucked into her small bed, Jake reached for Sarah's hand. "I received a letter from the lawyer today," he said, his expression unreadable. Sarah's heart quickened. "And he believes he's found a solution. There's a judge in Prescott willing to grant an annulment on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. It won't be simple, but with the testimonies he's gathered, including the doctor in Boston who witnessed your injuries." Jake paused. "It's possible, Sarah, you could be free." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "Truly free." Jake nodded, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small, worn leather pouch. "Which is why," he continued, his voice rough with emotion, "I wanted to ask you something." From the pouch he extracted a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they headed west from Kentucky with nothing but hope in each other." Sarah's breath caught as Jake slid from his chair to one knee before her. "Sarah Jenkins," he said softly, "I found you in the grass, half dead with your baby crying beside you. I never expected you'd bring my heart back to life too." He held out the ring. "Once you're free, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of letting me be a father to Emma and building a life together, however humble it might be?" Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. When she found her voice, it was thick with emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, too large, but they would have it sized properly in town. Then he gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the future they would build together. Spring brought new beginnings to the O'Malley homestead. Sarah's annulment was granted in February, after a tense hearing in Prescott where she testified to Richard's cruelty while Jake sat supportively in the courthouse, Emma on his knee. The sympathetic judge, having reviewed affidavits from the Boston doctor and Sarah's former lady's maid, ruled in her favor, legally severing her ties to Richard Jenkins and restoring her maiden name of Sarah James. A month later, on a perfect March morning with wildflowers dotting the landscape, Sarah and Jake exchanged vows before a small gathering of friends. Sheriff Wilson stood as Jake's best man, while Emma, now walking confidently, toddled down the makeshift aisle scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. "I take you, Sarah James, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Jake vowed, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "I promise to protect you and Emma, to cherish you both all the days of my life, and to build a home filled with love and laughter." Sarah, radiant in a simple white dress sewn by the women of Silver Creek, responded in kind. "I take you, Jake O'Malley, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to stand by your side through whatever life brings, to create a home with you built on trust and respect, and to love you faithfully until my last breath." When the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jake swept Sarah into an embrace that drew good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. Emma, not to be left out, wrapped her small arms around their legs, creating a family circle that moved more than one observer to happy tears. The celebration that followed was modest by Eastern standards but rich in genuine warmth and community. Tables laden with food stretched beneath the cottonwood trees, a fiddler played lively tunes, and as the sun began to set, Jake led his new wife in a dance beneath the stars. "Happy," he murmured against her ear as they swayed together. "More than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied, resting her head against his chest. Later, after the guests had departed and Emma slept soundly in her bed, Jake carried Sarah across the threshold of their cabin, no longer his alone, but truly theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley," he said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping her within the circle of his arms. Sarah's fingers traced the planes of his face in the lamplight. "I've been home since the moment you found us," she whispered before drawing his lips down to hers. Summer passed in a haze of hard work and happiness as the O'Malley family settled into their new life. Jake's small cattle operation began to flourish, while Sarah's garden yielded abundant vegetables that she preserved for the coming winter. Emma grew daily, her vocabulary expanding to include mama, papa, and a selection of animal sounds that never failed to delight both parents. One August evening, as a thunderstorm rolled across the desert, Sarah sat on their porch watching the distant lightning illuminate the mountains. Jake joined her, passing her a cup of coffee before settling into the chair beside hers. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, noticing her contemplative expression. Sarah smiled, setting her cup aside and taking his hand. "I was thinking about how quickly life can change," she replied. "A year ago I was running for my life, certain Emma and I would die alone in the wilderness." "And now," Jake prompted, squeezing her fingers gently. Now I have everything I never dared dream of." She hesitated, a mysterious smile playing at her lips. "In fact, I'll have even more than I imagined come winter." Jake's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Sarah guided his hand to rest against her still flat abdomen. "Emma's going to be a big sister," she said softly. Jake's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to unbridled joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby, our baby." Sarah nodded, laughing as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite the limited space of the porch. "Are you pleased?" she asked when he finally set her down. "Pleased?" Jake repeated incredulously. "Sarah, there aren't words." He dropped to his knees, pressing his face against her middle. "When, February, the doctor thinks." She ran her fingers through his hair. "A winter baby to warm our hearts." Jake rose, framing her face with his hands. "I love you, Sarah O'Malley," he said fiercely. "You and Emma and this little one. More than I ever thought possible." As their lips met, the storm broke overhead, rain drumming on the roof in a symphony of renewal and life, much like the love that had blossomed between them from the most unexpected of beginnings. The following February, as snow dusted the distant mountains, Sarah gave birth to a healthy son they named Thomas Jacob O'Malley. Emma, now approaching 2, regarded her new brother with solemn curiosity before declaring him "mine baby," and assuming a protective stance that amused and touched everyone who witnessed it. The family's happiness was complete, their modest homestead transformed into a haven of love and security. Jake continued to expand their cattle operation, eventually hiring 2 ranch hands to help with the growing herd. Sarah, between caring for their children, established a small but profitable sideline selling her preserves and baked goods in Silver Creek. As the years passed, their family and prosperity grew together. 2 more children joined them, a daughter, Margaret, born in the spring of 1876, and another son, William, arriving in the autumn of 1878. The original cabin expanded into a proper ranch house with enough rooms for their growing brood and the occasional visitor. Emma, the child who had inadvertently brought them together, grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's blue eyes and a spirit of independence that both worried and delighted her parents. At 17, she announced her intention to attend the new women's college in California, a declaration that sparked heated debate until Jake, to everyone's surprise, sided firmly with his adopted daughter. "Your mother risked everything for your freedom and future," he told Emma one evening as they sat together on the porch of the home he had built for them all. "I won't dishonor that courage by limiting yours." Sarah, overhearing this exchange, felt her heart swell with love for the man who had saved them both on that desperate day so long ago. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jake surprised Sarah with a trip to San Francisco, their first real journey away from the ranch. As they stood together on the hillside overlooking the magnificent bay, Jake's arm wrapped securely around her waist, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary path that had led them there. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked, the familiar question a comfortable ritual between them now. Sarah smiled up at him, the fine lines around her eyes testament to years of laughter and desert sun. "I was thinking about how a single act of kindness can change everything," she replied. "One moment of compassion when my baby was crying from hunger in the grass, and you took off your coat and picked us up." Jake's eyes, still as warm and steady as they had been on that first day, held hers. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. "For both of us," Sarah agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him as the setting sun turned the western sky to gold, a fitting metaphor, she thought, for the rich and precious life they had built together from the ashes of despair. Later that night, In the privacy of their hotel room, they made love with the tender familiarity of two people who had weathered life's storms together and emerged stronger for it. As Sarah drifted toward sleep in Jake's arms, she whispered the truth that had sustained them through 2 decades together. "You saved us that day, but in saving us, you saved yourself too." Jake's arms tightened around her. "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "And we keep doing it every day." It was true, Sarah realized as sleep claimed her. Their love story hadn't ended with wedding bells or the birth of their children. It continued to unfold with each challenge overcome, each joy shared, each quiet moment of understanding that passed between them. From a desperate encounter in the wilderness had grown a love that transformed not just two lives, but created a legacy of strength, compassion, and family that would endure long after they were gone. As the gentle rhythm of Jake's breathing matched hers in the darkness, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginnings, led exactly where they were meant to go. Years later, when their grandchildren gathered around to hear the story of how their family began, Jake and Sarah would exchange a private smile over the eager young heads. The children loved the dramatic tale, the desperate mother, the crying baby, the heroic cowboy, but only Jake and Sarah truly understood the courage it had taken to build a life from such fragile beginnings. Only they knew how close they had come to never finding each other at all. And in quiet moments, when the house was still and memories rose unbidden, they would sometimes speak of that day, the blazing sun, the parched grass, the weak cries of a hungry baby, and marvel at how fate had brought them to that precise moment in time when one act of human kindness changed everything. "I wasn't looking for love," Jake would often say, his weathered hand clasping Sarah's. "Neither was I," she would reply. "I was only looking for survival." "And we found both," Jake would conclude, the simple truth of it never failing to fill their hearts with gratitude, even after all the years that had passed. For Sarah and Jake O'Malley, their love story had begun with the most basic human needs: shelter, safety, sustenance, and had grown into something that nourished not just their bodies but their souls. From the barren Arizona landscape had blossomed a family tree with roots as deep and enduring as the ancient cottonwoods that lined the creek beside their home. And it had all started with a baby crying from hunger in the grass, and a cowboy who took off his coat and picked them up.